Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Public Allies. Public Allies has been working behind the scenes to bring new programming to all of you. And this new programming is going to be in the form of stories, which are going to help you in your personal and professional growth. Public Allies always strives to help those in the community. And through these webinars, we intend to help businesses as well as individuals in their professional and personal lives. So thank you so much for being patient with us. And I hope you, and I know that you're going to like our programming in 2022. Today, we're here to talk about divorce. Divorce is one of the most significant losses in one of the stressful life events for anybody to experience. Your brain is responding to the divorce as a threat. The part of your brain that manages emotion and the fight, flight, freeze response kicks into gear. You don't know what you're thinking is right or wrong. You don't know the process and the consequences. People who undergo divorce face a variety of psychological issues, including increased stress, lower life satisfaction, depression, increased medical visits, and an overall increase in mortality sometimes when compared to the ones who remain married. To overcome these issues, it's better to know what needs to be done and how it affects your life and also your loved ones. Public Allies has been fortunate to have law experts as our guests in the past, and we plan to bring a series of law-related webinars to our audiences. The first in this series is separation and divorce. And today, myself, Aisha Sardar, and Neeru Padmanabhan are going to be the hosts and moderators of this webinar. So we want to welcome our guests, Jay Chauhan and JANA TSANG. Welcome, guys.
Thank you, Aisha.
Thanks for having us.
Now over to Neeru. Neeru, take it on.
Hello, everybody, and it is great to be back. Welcome to 2022. We are going away from our regular programming and we're bringing you this new series. So if you have any questions, concerns, give us a call, give us an email, and you can reach out to us on Messenger as you always do. Leave comments behind because we're going to try our best to bring you more education. Here at Public Allies, we believe education is the great equalizer. And in the past, we've brought you great educational webinars and great information. And this has brought you a lot of education and a lot of knowledge. So again, this series for you, the law series. I'd like to, by introducing myself and Aisha. You didn't introduce yourself. Aisha always forgets to introduce herself as well. So my name is Neeru Padmanabhan. For viewers that don't know me, I'm a financial professional as well as a social services worker. I've been in social services for about 15 years, and I am the director of engagement at Public Allies. So welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us. Back to you, Aisha.
So let's introduce our guest for today. I'm going to start by introducing our lady in the black, JANA TSANG. She is the principal lawyer at TSANG Law with 12 years plus experience practicing family law, wills, and estate. JANA assists her clients in all things family law, from negotiating cohabitation agreements, marriage contracts, custody or separation agreements, to litigation, separation, divorce proceedings. JANA also helps her clients in creating and updating their wills and powers of attorney documents to ensure that the proper decision makers and beneficiaries are in place. At the same time, working with her clients on tax minimization strategies to reduce estate administration tax payable on death. Welcome, JANA. We're so happy to have you back, and I hope you have had a wonderful beginning of 2022.
Thanks very much for having me, Aisha, and it's great to be back, and I look forward to continuing the series with the both of you and with Jay.
I want to welcome Jay Chauhan, who is our guest for tonight as well. A little bit about him is Jay Chauhan is called to bar in Ontario, Canada, England, and India. His academic background includes LLB and JD degrees from Osgoode Hall, Toronto, Barrister at Law from Lincoln's Inn, England, BSc Economics from London School of Economics, and Master's degree from Technical University of Berlin in Development Economics. In 1992, he was appointed a deputy judge and worked 24 years as a deputy judge part-time and retired in 2016. As a lawyer and judge, he has lectured before the Tanganyika? Sorry, Jay, how do you say that?
Tanzania.
Oh, Tanzania. Okay, Tanzania Law Society, Bermuda Bar Association, and universities of Chandigarh and Gujarat, and the Ahmedabad Institute of Management, and has done continuing education programs for Ontario Lawyer and Paralegals and Bermuda Bar Association. He has a mentorship group for lawyers where he supports lawyers who want to launch legal practice and inspires them to achieve their best in their careers. He also works with a charity called Friends Outreach, where we want to reach out to assist others who are in need in Canada and abroad. He has written many articles in law in a lot of magazines and in different languages, and won an award as a legal writer from Ethnic Journalists Association. The award was presented by the Federal Minister, Jean Augustin, in 2006, and he now has turned his mind to writing nonfiction in the last few years and says he's still learning it. So thank you so much for being here today, Jay.
Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction. Thank you very much.
So happy to have you back, and hopefully we will see more of you and Jana on Public Allies.
Thank
So
you.
let's dive into our conversation here. Jana, if you can explain to us a little bit about the law of separation and divorce in Canada, that will be wonderful, because that gives our viewers a perspective of where we are going and what the law actually says, right?
Yeah, sounds good. So with family law, my focus will be more so within Ontario, and Jay can speak to the broader aspects. When two people separate in Ontario, they are faced with, dealing with a number of issues that arise from the breakdown of their relationship. So, if they have children, now they have to decide, are they going to be joint decision makers with respect to the children's major decisions? What is the time sharing schedule going to be like between the two households? And that's just, for regular sort of, during school, how time is going to work. There's additional considerations for how holidays are to be shared, and who goes what and when, and who needs to do the pickup, who is responsible for drop-offs. All of these things come into play with respect to the kids' piece. Things get even more complicated when one of the parents want to potentially relocate outside of the city, potentially outside of the province, or even outside of the country. And so this can potentially cause a lot of negotiating, a lot of conflict between the parents if they are not able to come to an agreement on what works best for their situation, and what works best for their family, and what works best for their child. So that's one aspect of it. Outside of the child-related issues, there are many facets of finances that would need to be worked out. So the first aspect I'll touch on is the issue of child support. So again, if there are children involved, depending on what the time sharing schedule looks like, there's likely going to be some form of child support that flows from one parent to the other. Child support is based on the person's income. So it is quite structured by the child support guidelines. By and large, you make X amount of dollars. For the two kids of the relationship, you pay Y dollars, and that's pretty fixed and is pretty standardized that way. And the point of that is to try to decrease the argument between the parents in terms of arguing about what the monthly living expenses for the kids would be. In addition to child support, there's something called extraordinary expenses, and that covers any expenses for the kids that go beyond the basics, so beyond food, clothing, and shelter. So some examples of extraordinary expenses can be daycare costs, If you put them in sports, music, art, summer camps, Kumon, those types of things, and those are usually shared by the parents in proportion to their income. So if they make about the same amount, then it's likely going to be a 50-50 share. If one person makes more, then it will be all dependent on the math. So it could be 60-40, 70-30, however the math works out. Outside of the child support issue, there is also the possibility of spousal support. Spousal support is also commonly referred to as alimony. And so if there's been a financial imbalance between the two parties during the relationship, if one person has given up more, potentially, in terms of career developments, or if they moved from a different country or different province to be with the other person, and as a result had given up on their career, then there might be some entitlements to spousal support. And so spousal support, it's not an automatic given. And so to look at that issue, we would really have to look at the roles that were taken by the parties during the relationship, what the family unit looks like, and how young the children are, and that type of thing. And then any lawyers that are assisting in the situation can help provide them with ballpark calculations on what that might look like, and then to negotiate from that point forward. Last but not least is the issue of property division. So property division within Ontario, how that gets calculated is we look at what assets and debts have accrued starting from the date of marriage all the way through until the date of separation. So what they each bring into the marriage is a deduction for each of them. And then what they have after the date of separation does not factor into the property division piece at all. And so, I can say that if I were to separate from my spouse and we separated as of today and I win the lottery tomorrow, then my spouse doesn't get to claim any of that. With property division, we don't look to divide each individual asset. So, we don't look at, what's in your bank account? Okay, I'm going to take half of that, and then you're going to take half of my savings account. We look at what you each have in terms of assets. So we essentially line the two people up in their own columns. We list their assets, and we also list their debts, and then we calculate what they each have in terms of equity. So we take their total amount of assets minus their debts, which gives us their equity number. And we then look at the two equity positions of the two people to see who has the higher number. So if using just a quick example, if I have $1 million at the date of my separation, that's my equity number. My spouse has $800,000, and that's his equity number. Then we look at the difference between the two. So 1 million minus 800,000 is 200,000, and I would be responsible for paying him half of that. So half of 200,000 being $100,000. And so that's how we would deal with property division. That's sort of the simple approach to it. There's lots of work that go behind those calculations, but by and large, that's those are the issues surrounding separation. And then the divorce in and of itself, it's just a process that allows someone to remarry in the future. And so in an ideal situation, the two people would not be required to go to court, if they are able to negotiate and put their terms into a separation agreement. Once that's done, then they file for divorce. And in Ontario, again, we do have to wait 1 year from the date of separation before the divorce can be finalized. And that was put in place to make sure that, people don't get divorced too quickly and then have regrets later on. And so it's a bit of a cooling period. There are exceptions to the 1 year waiting period. And so in instances where there's been abuse or infidelity, then there is a possibility to get a divorce much quicker that way.
Okay. So what if they had property before marriage, and is that counted?
It is. So both assets and debts prior to marriage can act as a deduction. So essentially whatever equity you bring into the marriage gets deducted from your equity at separation. So if I owned a house and it was worth $300,000 prior to marriage. And on date of separation, we live in a different house. I had sold that house prior, during the relationship. But that $300,000 now counts towards my equity number. So using the example of me having $1 million in my equity, I get to deduct that 300,000 from that million.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because what you each bring into the marriage, you get to take out of it.
All right. And that's wonderful to know. And with that, we will just go in for a break and we will be back for our second round. Thank you, Jana, for that wonderful explanation of what the law of separation divorce means in Canada. But Jay, we would like to know from you the broader perspective. Like, is there any other way? Is there an alternative to solve this problem rather than going to the courts? Can you advise if people can bypass the court?
Thank you. It was a wonderful summary that Jana did that gives the perspective of what actually happens in a nitty-gritty fashion in the courtroom once you get there. The challenge that I'm going to describe, Aisha, in this meeting is what happens in the terms of the legal system as a whole and what happens to society in terms of how people do separate and what actually happened to the children and the surrounding circumstances that affects the separation process. So that is my focus on what I want to say, because Jana has very aptly described accurately the summary of the law in Ontario. I think I would suggest, Aisha, that I also concentrate more on the Ontario system, although, as Niru pointed out, I'm a member of other bars, but it would be easier to describe one system, and in that system to describe what the problems and challenges are, which goes in some of the jurisdiction, the challenges are different, somewhat different. But let me begin by saying that before you go to the court, the biggest challenge is the biggest event in your life happens when you're separating. There is an extreme amount of emotional trauma. It is pretty close emotionally to a member of the family dying. And the loss of a spouse is extremely emotionally strenuous, to say the least. So when you deal with a situation, you would expect that the legal system would come to your rescue. But I regret to say that is my observation, having worked in the legal system in Ontario for quite a few decades, that what appears to be the solution of the problem is not always the best solution. The first problem, in my view, is the question of the system itself in terms of how it is designed. The Ontario system is based on the English law, which is adversarial, which means that when you pose a question of the types that Jana pointed out, such as, for example, that you want custody, such as, for example, the separation of assets, such as, for example, the amount of property that you would divide. But before you reach that particular point, you have to frame the question. Did the spouse commit, for example, in divorce case, adultery? Did the spouse not provide sufficient amount of assets? In Ontario, as Jana will tell you, there are guidelines for the support obligations, but they're subject to adjustment by the judge. And I think when you deal with the details that Jana told you about, is the division of the property based on the capital amount that somebody brings to the family, etc., and a very complicated formula, which in lawyers call it net family property. But these issues are complicated. So you are already emotionally distressed. And if you look at the statistics, Aisha, that about 65% of the population does not even get a lawyer to go to the court. We have a situation, you asked me to recite some examples. We have a situation right now that I'm dealing with where, being disappointed with the system, the parties commence the proceedings without lawyers. So they got locked into the procedure and even consented to certain judgment, which in my view was obtained improperly because the financial statements were not disclosed. A very strong kind of assumption that you will make full disclosure to each spouse so that you can ask the other spouse for a certain amount of division of the assets, a certain amount of money, certain amount of support, but you cannot make these decisions until you make the disclosure of the financial statement to the other spouse. And it's usually in a sworn statement. So the first concern in my mind is that the system is adversarial. You're already hostile to the spouse because of the disappointment you went through. On top of that, you must now look for a legal system that requires you to make further accusations. So in a hostile atmosphere, you must make accusation to the other spouse as to the wrongdoing they have done to you. The feelings are already extremely strong in that situation. So very often you will see that the statements made in what I call accusations or claims, I think that Ayusha would call it cause of action that you have is worded in a manner which makes the other person even more hostile by the time they read it, by the time they prepare for it, by the time they talk to the lawyer. I give you one example. You asked me, Ayusha, to give example. I was in the courtroom in my younger days when I was Ayusha's age, and I was in Toronto at Queen Street. And I tried to enter the court. There was a policeman standing in front there. And I said to him that I had never seen a policeman in a court system at the entrance. So I asked him why he was there. He said, because just the day before, the opposing party actually took a shot with a gun at the opposing lawyer. And ever since then, I've seen now security system that checks if you have a gun and you will walk there. I think in the time that Jana has been practicing, you would have seen always a security system, but that system came about when people feel so hostile and they think the lawyers are fostering that hostility. Very often, lawyer's job is in Ontario to try to represent the interest of your client. And the adversarial system requires that you only represent the client's interest in what's called a conflict of interest environment. So I explained to you that firstly, the number of people who even have a lawyer is extremely limited in Ontario. So they are considering right now, the Law Society is now considering allowing paralegals to represent the clients because they are cheaper and the lawyers have training, very often a first degree, second degree. By the time you finish being a lawyer in Ontario, you roughly have about 8 to 10 years of education. That makes it very difficult for the lawyers and who have to maintain the offices to charge modest fees. And therefore, the lawyers very often are charging anything from about $250 to $500 an hour. And that makes it prohibitively expensive for an average couple to finance, especially when their assets that are mortgaged up to the highest level. When they're separating, there's not enough money to go around, and then you have to pay the lawyer. So very often, the cost of the lawyer is prohibitive, to say the least. So I've described to you, in other words, the problem going to the system itself. When you go to the system that Jana described to you, the forms have been designed in Ontario so that if you do not have the support of a lawyer, you're describing in the forms your claim. And in the forms are designed so that a person should be able to fill out the blanks without writing too much of a story. So you don't have to be a novelist to try to write a story, but you have forms which makes it easier to write the story. Now, I think that if you had a regular action at one point in time in the family law in Ontario, that you had a right to make a statement of claim, but then the forms were designed to enable people without legal background to write that. So, but let me tell you my impression, because we still handle some cases in family law, that the completion of the forms in determining your income system and the net family property system that Jana described to you is, I can describe it in the words formidable, not a small challenge to figure this out mathematically. So you really need a lawyer, actually. And I think if you're a lawyer, then you still need to read the law in careful detail to figure it out before you even write it. That's why family law has become a specialty. So I think with all these challenges, there is one more impediment that you go through. If you look at the family system, and I think you're a member and you have an organization that supports women. So let me address that comment to your group, that when the issue happens, the law pretends that everybody is equal, men and women are equal. But in my observation, they're not equal. Why don't I consider them not to be equal? Because you will see inevitably that regardless of the legal system, it's always the woman that will end up looking after the children. And no matter what the situation is like, the instinct of the women, and I think you hinted on evolution, if you want my view, Aisha, that it dictates that the women will look after children. The instinct to look after children is very strong. So there's support obligations you must go through, that even if you obtain a judgment requiring the husband, it's usually the husband. And the playing fields are changing in Ontario, in my view. So more and more women are becoming more educated. So when I was Jana's age and practicing, actually, most of the men were in the professions and had top jobs. But now you have a situation where women have the permission, and society permits them to have the top jobs. They can be doctors now, lawyers now, and all the chief executives. But if you look at the actual numbers and actual portion in a typical family that is separating, then you'll see that the men have some advantage there, in the sense that they have the better jobs. So usually judges are very sympathetic with the women and even the situation of children. But to give you my comment, Aisha,
Jay, just to give you a quick stop, because we have a few questions as we go along, and I'm going to have to trail you back just slightly on previous comments. So until we keep on going along, maybe you can address some of the questions as you go along. So I'll take you back a little bit. You talked about the adversarial system, and many of our clients have questions about how the system is biased, but if they are unable to afford divorce lawyers, or they're unable to go through the family law system as an adversarial system, what are their other recourses? What are other things that they can do to still achieve their final goal, but not have to pay some of those costs and not have to go through that adversarial system?
Well, good question, Nero. So I just want to address that actually. So I think that option is not very well exercised, but is very possible. And I do recommend actually that most couples going through should opt to get into a settlement agreement through a mediator. And the reason for the mediator being a better remedy is that it gives you the ability to be flexible in your comments, express your emotions more easily, and then you reach the consensus, if you like, if you try to reach a consensus of the issues that you're dealing with in that family property, and other issues of custody, they are more easily dealt with in a settlement agreement, in terms of including the timing of the visits, the visitation rights of the other spouse, etc. So when you prepare a separation agreement, very often I think that the parties who've agreed will even ask for an order to be obtained. My view is that it's better to obtain a settlement agreement and then even ask them, the lawyers, if they agree, or if they are on your own, you ask for that separation agreement to be a part of the judgment or order of the judge. So I think in a brief, I think that that is a better solution in my view. This is becoming more popular. There is a thing in Ontario where now the lawyers are recognizing that this adversarial system that I described in great detail, and the extreme disappointment that the children are not even represented in the litigation system, and therefore the care and concern that you would have to show to the children, it can do it much better in the mediation system, because there you can ask the mediator to take into account the expectations of the children, but the rules with respect to which children can come to the court are very, how should I say, difficult, because evidence requires a certain amount of age and ability to say something to the judge. And the judges don't encourage children to come to the court system because it's very formidable. So I think with all those things said, Nero, the better thing is, and a simple observation is that a settlement arrangement is a better arrangement.
Thank you. Thank you, Jay, for that. I would like to ask Jana on the same question. Like when we talk about mediators, are we talking about lawyers, or are we talking about somebody outsiders, family members, uncle, aunts, friends? Who is it?
I mean, really, it can be anyone that they want it to be. So if they have a particular cultural or religious background, so like, they belong to a church or a synagogue or anything like that, like, they can ask their religious leaders to help them talk about the issues, to help them mediate the issues. Outside of that, like, if there is a trusted family member to help them talk through some of these things, they can trust that person to not be biased towards one person or favor one person's position over the other, then that's usually a positive way to go as well. And then moving on to the professional mediators. So there are all types of mediators out there for people who are looking at mediation options. And if they are looking to hire a professional, I do recommend that they look to certified mediators, so mediators that have been certified by their local body. So they have the proper, training, and they have, especially within family law, like they have been trained on techniques in terms of dealing with power imbalances within relationships, dealing with couples who have domestic violence backgrounds or issues that are involved, right? So there are mediators that are trained on this. Some mediators are social workers, some are just mediators outright, some are also lawyers. And so you do have a variety of different mediators that are available to you. For people who are interested in the mediation option, it is a great way to go if the two sides are agreed to engage in the process and to engage with it with full transparency and to make sure that they are giving it a good go at it, and not just using it as a stepping stone to say, oh well, I tried, it didn't work, and then now we're going to court or something like that.
Mm-hmm. It's absolutely amazing, Jana. Thank you for explaining that. We're just going to go on our next break, everybody. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back, everybody. And we have our amazing two lawyers here, Jay Chauhan and JANA TSANG. Thank you again. On the third part of our series, we want to jump back a little bit and jump back and forth between the individuals that we deal with and the society that we deal with. We had a great question that was asked, and it was about immigrations and immigrants that are divorcing. So how does it affect immigrant families who have very little knowledge of the process of divorce or separation? Low-income families, blended families, etc. So how does that affect? I want to start with Jana, and then we'll go to Jay.
Just to add a little bit about in that question, and the cultural changes and how it affects their culture, their what they bring from back home. How does that change as well? So just add to the twist about immigration. Go ahead, Jay.
All right. So, I mean, I think that's a very interesting topic that we can easily spend an hour alone just talking about. But in trying to keep it brief, I mean, in terms of, I would say that regardless of, their culture, religious backgrounds, a lot of us, whether it's, the way we grew up or the cultures that we grew up in, we're maybe hesitant about going out and seeking information for ourselves. And also there's this general perception that, lawyers are expensive. And so if I'm going through the situation, I don't want to spend money on lawyers, so-and-so told me this. And that's what property division is, even though that might not be the actual correct information. So my suggestion to, immigrants, newcomers, or, people who've even been here for a long time is that if you are going through this process, or if you know someone going through this process, encourage yourself to seek professional help. And just because you're talking to a lawyer doesn't mean you have to spend thousands of dollars. A lot of lawyers like myself offer a free initial consultation, and then if you want to work with them, you can work with them on a limited basis. So maybe just have a few consultations with them to get a sense of what the property division looks like, or what are my rights and entitlements with respect to these child related issues. So get that information for yourself, and then decide from that point forward where you want to go from there. Whether it's continuing with a lawyer or going to mediation, but finding out that information for yourself first, finding out what your entitlements are, and then deciding from that point forward, based on, what your financial circumstances look like, and, how that might drive what your next steps might be. With people who are lower in income or have more family needs, there are services out there that are available. There's a pro bono society that might take on cases for free. There is also Legal Aid Ontario. So if you fit within their income bracket, you can potentially receive legal services for free, or at a very much reduced rate. So there are services out there that are available to people who are lower in income. And so it doesn't mean, and it shouldn't mean that just because someone doesn't have the funds that they're not able to engage in the process, or at least get information for themselves. Although, I do agree with what Jay has said in the past, and I'm sure he'll dive into it a little bit more. Our systems are not well structured to help the people who need help the most in our societies. And so I think there's a lot of work that our government needs to do. But that's where I think it's fantastic that nonprofits or charities like Public Allies try to fill the gap, right, in providing information and empowering people with providing as much information as possible, or at least a starting point, right? Being aware of something, and then being able to seek out information from there. So great job, you guys.
Thank you.
And I'd love to reframe this question for you, Jay. Obviously, I'd love you to answer the question, but also reframe it in terms of how it looks in the broader perspective, not only as Jana described, that we're not well structured, but also for immigrants. How do lawyers and the law communicate with immigrants? How is the law designed to assist them or deter them? So I'd love you to touch on that points, because you do that so well when you discuss the broader structure.
So let me, Niroj, explain actually, instead of trying to give the theory, but I agree with Jenna very much actually, that we need to address that issue in a broader sense of how do you bring this complex legal system to the average person. When you say the average person, Canadian, who is brought up with the sensitivity of the law, does not work the same for immigrant communities. Because I'm a member of the Indian bar as well, and I did lecture in the university in India, where the main thing that I addressed was that I think the population that immigrates to Canada is fairly highly educated, actually, much higher than the average of Canada. So they are educated, but they're not necessarily, how should I say, familiar with the legal system. So instead of trying to give the theory, I'm going to give you an example, actually, what typically happens, and how traumatic it is actually to go through that experience. To put it in simple words, husband comes with a degree, and I described it in my novel, by the way, Avisha, a degree with an engineering degree, but he's driving a taxi. You can have a doctor driving a taxi in Canada because he's not ready. He comes at a stage because of the point system when he's mature, he's got a family. So he's firstly extremely upset at having to lower his professional category in which he was used to working in a society that respected him for his professional standing. So he's already upset. He goes home and he talks to his wife, actually, that here's how his day went doing whatever job he was doing, security guard, factory job, driving a taxi, whatever. So there's a high amount of tension which you cannot express to the outside society, actually. And therefore it is now taken out very often the family members, like the way it's happening in the Corona period itself. So the high tension. The wife is in a worse situation Because if you take the Indian culture, for example, and sometimes Chinese culture and South Asian culture as a whole, so very often the women are so to speak sheltered, protected, and in the context of the culture, they are broadly speaking supported, and they're not as independent as they are in the Canadian society. Because in the last 50 years, it has become the norm for women to work. So when the women come from certain countries who are not used to working, they might be qualified, but they're not used to working. They are frustrated being in the house, not having the context and the family and connections that you have. Let's say if you're living in Bangalore also, you would have the connections, you have the support of people around you. You do not have that support. So the stage is set in the family for extreme tension, two ways, not only the husband, but the wife as well. But a wife is very often the victim because you see, I think in terms of the statistics, it's not that husband don't suffer either, but the stage is set for the hostilities to develop. And typically what happens that one day, out of extreme anger, somebody, throws, I have a case, by the way, I did a case actually, when the wife was drinking wine and the husband said, you're drinking too much wine, because that was an escape actually from the tensions of living and finding a job and adjusting to the society. So I think that language is a part of it. You're trying to perfect your language ability as well. So this glass, he was holding the glass, and the wife actually tried to hold the glass back, and it went into her eyes. So the mother-in-law charged the person with a criminal offense. So now she goes into the police station to complain. What used to be the case, actually, this is about a few years ago, when the family law was treated somewhat differently in the terms of the law of assault, actually. So what happens is that the law was changed, that became zero tolerance arrangement from the Attorney General's office that tell all the police that any assault in the family is not acceptable. So now, in some societies where they come from, even if the law is common law and there's a law of assault, it is treated differently in Canada in that you will now have the wife going, and she's asked to go to the police station actually. So first the police may come in the family, interview the two separately, but then the wife says that she's in an emotional state because she feels herself very helpless. So she has called the police. Very likely she has called the police. And the husband was the person who was aggressive, physically aggressive. So now she's asked to give a videotape, because what they're doing is they're not just taking the statement, which she can retract, but it will be put on a video so that if she takes the statement back, because she recognizes after the event that if the husband is sitting in jail, he won't be able to support the family. And immigrant families try to support, they have no connections, and they need to be able to make income. And the police very often will take them first into the jail and sit in the cell and let him just wait it out until the time the JP appears, actually, very often a Friday. And then Monday the JP appears and gives a bail. But in any event, if the wife then says, no, I don't want to give evidence, the police will make a statement to the effect that, look, if you don't give the evidence, you made a complaint and you're now witness. So she's required to come as a witness against her husband. And therefore, she now ends up actually giving evidence against the husband. Is the most traumatic thing that a wife can go through, knowing that the conviction that will happen will result in inability of the husband to even support the family. Just say, imagine the scenario. Now, not only is the person not educated in the legal system, but the culture, the way it plays out in the legal system as well. The law in which Ontario in 1867 got inherited the legal system of England, and it's changed much more than England has changed, by the way. England only adopted the law of the, what you call no-fault marriage and divorce only in the year, it's going to be law in England only in the next few months, So in other words, Ontario is well ahead in terms of asserting the rights of the women. But if you assert the rights of the women and create a law that applies to everybody, the important thing to recognize is that if you're talking to the minority women who have recently migrated, the trauma, and the top of everything else that Jana told you, is a huge trauma of going to the legal system. The other part of it is that in India, for example, very often women don't even know the legal rights outside the big cities. So I think this is the part. So here where you try to educate the woman that you have legal rights in terms of your safety, security, assault, and so on. So to bring a person to that point, to give them the right is a problem, becomes a lawyer's problem to explain. But very often in criminal action, sorry, Anisha.
Yeah, no, but Jay, I was saying, like, everybody, both man and women, the immigrants need to know the law, because like you were explaining, this person, because he was frustrated and he didn't want her to drink the wine, and then he stuck it into her eye, and she's complaining about him, and then she's worried because he cannot take care of the family, but then she is going to endure the same kind of trauma again and again. So he also needs to know that she's a human being, and he cannot put his psychological issues or his stress on her, right? So there has to be a line drawn in between where it says that, okay, these are the consequences. The men in the family need to know, the women in the family need to know what is going to happen if you complain, what is going to happen, and what leads to that complaint, right?
Mm-hmm. I agree 100%. And I'd like to pose an extra question, and I think this would be very good for our audience to understand, is not only in immigrant families, just in general, when people do get in trouble and things get heated, as we talk about the law deviating from its regular and also not having enough knowledge, what are certain things that that the law does to assist people to help in changes like this before, not before, but after things get so heated, and after there's ongoing domestic issues or domestic problems? So I'd love to take this to JANA, and then Jay, if you can answer that question.
Well, the way our criminal system is structured currently, and for good or for bad, is that, like Jay mentioned, there's a zero violence policy. So if there is an allegation made by one person against the other that there has been some sort of violence, then more often than not, the accused perpetrator is removed from the home. They are not allowed to be back in the home. They're not. I don't practice criminal law, so I'm not as well versed in all of this. But just touching the borders of it on the family law issues, like a lot of times, if one person's being accused of doing something, regardless of whether they did or not, they're out of the house right away. They can't contact the other person directly or indirectly unless it's as related to court matters. They can't see their children until the children's aid have become involved. They've done an investigation and they've deemed it safe for that particular situation. So, I've had cases in the past where, unfortunately, someone was trying to take advantage of the system that way. So one parent made an unfounded violence allegation against the other person. The other person was automatically removed from the home, and that person wasn't able to see the children for 2 to 3 months until Children's Aid has finally, sort of gone through the situation and said that this person can resume contact with the kids. And there's a lot of damage, a lot of psychological damage to the family unit as a whole and to the children in particular, right? Like, having police involvement, it's very damaging in terms of, how they view their parents, how they view their parents' relationship, and any kind of impact that it might have on them personally. That being said, I think that's one of the potential downfalls of the system, the way it exists. But our system is structured in this way because we want to protect people that do actually report, violence that's been committed against them, right? That, a lot of times where people within domestic violence situation, I'm sure Aisha, you can speak much more to this as well, that, they don't want to report it because they don't want that blowback. They don't know what's going to happen to their family. Like, they don't have access to bank accounts. And so a lot of times they stay silent. They stay in that abusive situation. And that's why our system has evolved into the version that we have today, so that, you know, if and when someone does make this complaint, they're protected right away, because we don't want them to suffer in silence anymore.
Yeah, well, very good point there, Jana. This is many of the times for women that I counsel, the one thing I hear from them is, he might be a bad husband, but he's not a bad father. So I have to think twice before I file for divorce or separation because he's a good father, right? So Jay, I know we have spoken at length about the psychological issues that happen during separation in the family, like, you know, what everybody goes through. It is just not the husband and wife or the partners that go through it, but it is the whole family, right, who go through the stress and the trauma of it. Sometimes, you know, the people who are going through the separation don't even realize that the kids, even though they're very young, how it affects them, because one parent is not at home, they're not living with that parent, and they're not getting all that love and support. So what do you have to say? Like, you know, this is an issue which I don't know if there is a right or a wrong, because I believe if two people are not happy together, they should not live together. But at the same time, there are so many underlying issues there. Go ahead, Jay.
Well, I think you've got a very good point. Typically, I can use the expression North American culture as against the South Asian culture. You see, the family unit is gradually eroding as such. You look at the numbers, actually, number of people who do not get married is rising dramatically. If you take Japan, for example, fully 25% of the women do not want to get married and do not marry in Japan. It's a very high standard of living, similar to Canada, very, you know, sort of lifespan is very long, actually, like Japan and Canada have similarities in terms of the lifespan.
I'll just interrupt you there. And, you know, the research shows, and I have done a little bit of study on it, and it says because boyfriends, when they become husbands, they change. Like, you know, even girlfriends, when they become wives, they do change. But, you know, that is the reason why women don't want to get into it and don't want to have an abusive or not a good relationship. Go ahead, Jay. So sorry.
I want to explain, Jay. You've got a good point. Like you said, husbands change. I want to tell you about the experience of the wife changing. I've gone through how the wife changes.
No bias from your gender, though.
Then I don't have legal words. I'm going to use casual words to describe the scenario, which I've gone through in real life, because these examples have happened. Some cultures, which I don't describe, because it might appear as if I'm criticizing any culture. I'm not criticizing any culture whatsoever. I'm simply telling you what you are able to observe in society. Some cultures put the women in a very subordinate position. They come then to Canada, and all of a sudden you walk on the streets, and you feel absolutely different. That a woman can walk on the streets in the night, come home, and they can live a normal life. In many countries, it's not possible. In some countries, the legal system also reinforces the message that the woman is not equal to man in the legal system itself. So there is a huge amount of what I call pent-up feeling, and the world is so connected that they're seeing the free society, the free women, and the best way I can describe is like a champagne bottle. If you bring a champagne bottle and take the cork off, what happens? So the champagne bottle syndrome, if I can call it that, I have gone through that cases actually, where the accusation is made and the behavior is totally inappropriate in terms of the normal family life, actually, you know. So that, what I call the champagne bottle syndrome, actually can be extremely harmful to the family, because in a society where Canada says you are free and equal, it translates into the feeling of freedom, which has been suppressed for a very long time. So I think that I want to answer Neru's question actually. Is the knowledge of the law sufficient? Is not, Neru, in my view. Why do I say that actually? That what we should do in this seminars, I recommend that strongly actually, that if you want to pursue this thinking, I strongly believe that the training required to understand the family system, the freedom, including a sense of privacy, actually, which I think that is a very big factor, which is never discussed in anywhere I saw, that the privacy does not let the people, especially women, to express what they're feeling, because it's supposed to be private, supposed to be obedient to the husband and the family, etc. So I think we need to open up our sense of privacy a little bit more. And even in these seminars like this one, we should be able to talk and say, what can we do to prevent this extreme kind of behaviors that are happening? Can it be done? I strongly believe, yes, it can be done. It can be done because if you become aware the mechanics of relationship in a different cultural context, can it be learned? Yes. If we attempt to understand the dynamics of the marriage, the family, and then what is happening by the cultural change that is presented to you, especially minority women, or even the Canadian women, I would strongly think that there is a huge amount actually, that one can learn from creating ideas to prevent the trauma. And the biggest trauma, in my opinion, is not just to the spouses because they're adults. The children, in my opinion, who's suffering silently in the process of the divorce or break up the family with the legal system or without, is absolutely traumatic, and the loss to the society. Let me give you a statistic. It's very important that I make this point. You see, a child grows up in a family feeling secure, and there's an expectation of the child that the parents will get along sufficiently to give them protection. It's an instinctual situation that when the child wants a sense of security, which is not provided because they're seeing the parents argue. In a society, especially one that is, where we consider the high standard of living, which Canada is one of those countries, where when the economics actually has reached the point where the people can afford their security and women can find a job, they don't have to depend on a man. Like some societies, they have to depend on a man for livelihood. So when that happens, what should be the education, Nero, actually, that your question is, and what can be done is the knowledge, not necessarily just the law, but what do you do to understand that the children have a biggest value because they are the future of the society and how they will react. If you do not treat them correctly, there's enough statistics to show. There's an Australian study that I saw that they've studied the people through the entire lives, a group of people, and the correlationship between the criminal behavior in those who were incarcerated and those who had broken and violent families is extremely high. Yep. And therefore, that is an indication, Aisha, that the education is needed to understand that if a person is angry at some situation because your expectations of marriage are very high, and then it fails, it is the children first to suffer, and they have no representation, no ability to verbalize like lawyers do. They're trained to explain themselves, and the children are not trained. They're only looking for security, but you're giving them negative education on how to relate in the family. So when they have the family, they do the same thing that the parents did. So you'll see that, let me show you the statistics actually. So roughly from what I read, that the statistics of the broken families, as I call them, actually, those who look for divorce after they married first time around, you could talk about blended families, actually. It's about, I would estimate about 45% in Canada, about over 55% in the US, and it's a much lower rate in India, but I think it's got to do with the economics of society as well. You see, but if you look at Punjab and India,
backgrounds as well, right?
Where the societies, sorry, carry on.
No, where they come from. I'm sorry. I was just saying it is also the cultural backgrounds, what they have been, what they've seen, and what the society believes in. In India, being married is very important. So,
well, I think here's my challenge actually to all of you. Actually, I think what we should do is seminars in which we illustrate actually that we have Chinese culture, we have Indian culture, South Asian cultures, where we do believe in the family, where we do have certain values. So I think that you see very often the society tells you the opposite. Well, you're just an immigrant, so what do you have to contribute to society? I think the other way around. I think we in this seminar should bring across the value of the family, and if there is a dispute in the family, the decency and the courtesy and dignity through which we can terminate the marriage and rescue the children is what we should educate society about. And we have a contribution to make in this regard, in this society. What we bring to the society, in terms of a value system, is extremely important. Because I was sitting on a table with a minister once, a few years ago, And she was
Jay,
ministering.
we will have to end it in a minute. So my final question to you will be like, do you think bringing in the psychological factor along with the divorce, like, somehow combining it together is going to help the families? 1 minute to each speaker here. Go ahead and say something to end it. And we will continue this. We'll come back again with another one. But this one, I'm really sorry, we might have to stop. So Neeru, you want to go first? How do you think we can, how can we tie it together?
Definitely, we've had some amazing points today, and I've learned so much from Jana and Jay. Thank you so much for educating us. Even though we've worked in the system, Aisha and I, for so long through social services, through our nonprofit organization, we just don't grasp the nitty gritty details. And it's good to know that there's misconception, and lawyers are not really taught about the psychological impact. They're not really taught about the things that immigrant families go through. Because oftentimes when you run into certain people, and apart from you, Jay and Jana, you feel like they don't have empathy. It's not that they don't have empathy, it's just they don't know what they don't know. So as nurses are now getting more educated about psychological issues, they're getting more educated about social services because it's a part of their practice. Similar to that, I believe that lawyers should now get educated about immigrant societies, about immigrants and their plights, about psychological issues. And I think this would bridge the gap. Just as you, Jana and Jay, pointed out the same types of issues, I agree with you 100%. Off to you, Aisha. Why don't you say what would be your point of this?
I've worked in the past with Jana a little, like, I've referred a few people, and I like what she said, that, if you want to know about the law itself, if you want to get some advice, she doesn't charge the initial consultation, which becomes easier for people to see which way they want to go. And there are many other lawyers who do that. So if you're thinking it's really expensive, it might be, but the first consultation is free. So take that opportunity to know more about it. And also, there are a few lawyers, like I would be talking about Jana and Jay here, who talk about the psychological issues that a family goes through. So in that way, not all lawyers only think about, how to win the cases or how to put the other person in the wrong light and how to get their client the best that they can, but they're also thinking about the whole lot other things like the family, the kids, and after the divorce or separation, how do they help their clients by helping them get that counseling or help or counseling or talk therapy or all the other things. So I feel that becomes very important. That's the personal touch that these wonderful people bring to the table. So after you, Jana and Jay, you want to go first?
Oh, wait, okay. I think that in an article I sent to you, which was published in Law Times, I make this comment.
That is wonderful. Yeah, I'll put the link.
Okay.
Yeah.
In which I suggested that the separation process be conducted by a tribunal. And I was asked by a group actually to address that issue in terms of law reform, that in my view, a tribunal with a psychologist in it would be absolutely critical. And a financial consultant would be critical, because there is little thought given to how people reconstruct their financial lives and the lives of the children. With psychology and financial consulting could be paramount. So I'm strongly of the view that at the time of separation, a tribunal that a psychologist, financial consultant, and a lawyer type of a person explaining the rights would help a great deal if that was brought in about as a change in the legal system.
Yeah, I agree. And that article was amazing. I told you about it. Jana, off to you.
Jay, that's a fantastic point. And I guess I want to end on by reiterating what everybody said, and also what Aisha and Neeru and I have talked about in past webinars that we've had, is that separation is not, just an issue in a bubble on its own. it ties into so many other aspects of people's lives. And what I try to do when I'm speaking with people who might become clients, people who are consulting with me, what I try to do is to break the stigma of getting help, of going into therapy for yourself, because like you guys have said and made it very clear, like, the breakdown of a relationship, the loss of a spouse, it's a very traumatic experience, right? And so instead of spending, whatever my hourly rate is on me as your lawyer and, lamenting about your problems, I don't have the proper training like Aisha does as a psychologist, or as another therapist would have, to actually talk through these issues, to help bring some clarity to themselves, and also, get some closure, and to be able to move on a little bit better, or to make their decisions a little bit clearer with in terms of the next steps of their separation. And equally as important, if there are children that are involved, get the kids to see the counselor. Like, just because they seem like they're okay doesn't mean that, there isn't a lasting impact. Kids, I mean, we're all very different people. We all react in different ways. And so it's often very helpful for kids to have someone to talk to, that they feel like, they're not being pitted against one parent or the other. If they wanted to tell mom that, oh, I felt sad when I was visiting dad today, and then, having that used against dad, or whatever the case may be, right? So having that impartial third party that has, no ties to either parent, and for that child to be able to freely express themselves to that person, I think can be very helpful.
Absolutely. And I've told you again and again that, a third person can hear them better than their parents do. So thank you so much for this. This was wonderful. And like I said, we are going to have a lot of, we have lined up series of law and understanding of the law webinars. So thank you so much for today and for giving us your time. Jana, Jay, Neeru, all of you. It has been a wonderful time. It has been like a wonderful 1 hour that we have spent here. And yet I can go on and on about it. So thank you so much. And to all the viewers, thank you so much from Public Allies. We will see you again soon.
Thank you. See you.